Silence is the loudest sound in the world when a man's life hangs by a thread. In the VIP room of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, a billion-dollar deal wasn't failing because of money. It was failing because of a single word. A word that the hired translator got wrong on purpose. One waitress saw the gun hidden under the napkin. She saw the lie leaving the translator's lips. And she knew that if she didn't break the strictest rule of service, never speak unless spoken to, everyone in that room would be dead before dessert. She opened her mouth, and the Japanese mafia boss looked at her. That was the moment her life ended, and the nightmare began. The air inside the Obsidian, New York's most pretentious steakhouse tasted of truffle oil and old money. For Serafina Sterling, it tasted like exhaustion. At 26, Sarah wore the invisible armor of the service industry, a stiff black waistcoat, a forced smile, and the ability to disappear while standing in plain sight. Table 4 was the problem. It had been the problem all night. Seated at the head of the table was Kieran Stone. To the Wall Street journals, Stone was a venture capitalist with heavy interests in Tokyo real estate. To the shadows of the underworld, he was Kenji Sato, the Oyabun of the Sato Gumi, a man who had exiled himself to America to clean his money. He was striking sharp cheekbones, a suit cut by a tailor on Savile Row, and eyes that looked like poured concrete. Opposite him sat Dominic the Butcher Rossi. Rossi was loud sweating through his Brioni suit and drinking a 1995 Chateau Margaux like it was soda. Between them sat the interpreter, a nervous man named Arthur. Sarah refilled the water glasses, her hand steady. She knew the rules. Be furniture, be invisible. But she couldn't help but listen. Her grandmother had raised her in a tiny apartment in Osaka until she was 12, forcing her to memorize kanji until her fingers bled. Sarah spoke Japanese better than she spoke English, a secret she kept hidden under her American accent and her waitress apron. "Tell him," Rossi growled, stabbing a fork into his steak, "that I need the shipping routes secured by Friday, or the deal is off." Arthur the interpreter turned to Kenji. He spoke in Japanese, but his voice trembled. "Rossi-san says he requires the routes by Friday. He also says your organization is weak and he will crush you if you fail." Sarah froze. The water pitcher hovered an inch above the crystal glass. Rossi hadn't said that. He hadn't insulted the organization. He hadn't threatened to crush anyone. Arthur was adding words. Dangerous words. Kenji's face didn't move, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He slowly placed his chopsticks on the rest. He looked at Rossi, his eyes narrowing. Rossi, oblivious to the mistranslation, smiled greasy and wide. "Well, what's he say?" Arthur turned back to Rossi. "Mister, Stone is considering your generous offer." It was a lie, a double-blind setup. Arthur was trying to start a war. He was likely on the payroll of a third party paid to ensure Rossi and Kenji killed each other tonight. Sarah saw Kenji's right hand drift beneath the table. She saw the slight bulge of a suppressor against the fabric of his jacket. He was going to shoot Rossi right here, right now, based on a lie. If shots were fired, the bodyguards would unleash hell. Sarah was in the crossfire. She didn't think, she didn't calculate. "More water, sir," Sarah asked loudly, stepping directly between Kenji and Rossi. The table went silent. The bodyguard behind Kenji twitched his hand, moving to his lapel. Sarah looked directly at Kenji. She dropped the submissive waitress act. She locked eyes with the killer. "The interpreter is lying to you, Sato-sama." She said her Japanese flawless, utilizing the high formal register of the Kyoto elite. "The man opposite you is crude, but he did not insult your family. He only asked for the schedule. The interpreter is trying to provoke you." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Arthur the interpreter turned pale, his mouth opening and closing like a dying fish. She doesn't know what she's... Kenji didn't look at Arthur. He didn't look at Rossi. He stared at Sarah. For a lingering second, he analyzed her, the fray on her collar, the scar on her thumb, the terrified dilation of her pupils. "Is that so?" Kenji replied in English, his voice a deep, smooth baritone. He didn't have an accent. Sarah switched to English. "Yes." He added a threat that wasn't there. Rossi looked confused. "What the hell is going on? Who is the broad?" Kenji stood up. He smoothed his jacket. He looked at Arthur. "You're fired." Arthur scrambled back, knocking over his chair. "Mr. Stone, please." Kenji gestured to his head of security, a mountain of a man named Silas. "Escort Arthur to the kitchen. Ensure he receives his severance." Silas grabbed the interpreter by the neck and dragged him away. The restaurant was dead quiet. Other diners were staring. Kenji turned his gaze back to Sarah. He reached into his breast pocket. Sarah flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a black business card with a single gold emblem embossed on it. He placed it on her tray. "The wine was excellent," Kenji said. The translation was better. He signaled his men. They rose in unison. Kenji left Rossi, sitting there confused and furious with a half-eaten steak and a failed war. Sarah stood trembling in the middle of the dining room. Her manager, a petty tyrant named Gerald, stormed over his face purple. "You're fired, Sterling. Get your things and get out. You embarrassed our best client." Sarah looked at the black card on her tray. She had saved a life, maybe a dozen lives, and lost her livelihood. But as she touched the card, she felt a cold dread in her stomach. Men like Kenji Sato didn't give out cards. They gave out sentences. 3 days later, Sarah was sitting in her studio apartment in Queens, staring at the eviction notice taped to her door. The radiator was clanking a rhythmic, metallic death rattle that matched the pounding in her head. She hadn't called the number on the card. She had burned it. She knew who Kenji Sato was. Not the sanitized version in Forbes, but the real one. Her father, a disgraced diplomat named Richard Sterling, had whispered stories about the Sato clan in his drunken stupors before he drove his car off a bridge 3 years ago. They were ghosts. They were inevitable. She was applying for jobs at diners in Jersey, trying to run when the knock came. It wasn't a polite knock. It was 3 hard raps, authoritative. Final. Sarah looked through the peephole. Nothing but the distorted hallway fisheye view. She kept the chain on and cracked the door. "Amazon delivery," she lied, her voice shaking. A white envelope slid through the crack landing on her toe. "Open it, Miss Sterling," a voice said from the other side. It wasn't Kenji. It was Silas, the bodyguard. Sarah ripped the envelope open. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000 and a photo. The photo was of her father. But it wasn't an old photo. It was a grainy surveillance shot of Richard Sterling sitting at a cafe in Paris. The date stamp in the corner was from yesterday. Sarah's world tilted on its axis. "He's dead," she whispered. "My father is dead." "Open the door, Serafina," Silas said. She undid the chain. Silas stood there, filling the hallway. He wore a raincoat dripping with water. "Mr. Stone requests your presence for dinner. He says you have a lot to catch up on." "My father died in the Hudson River," Sarah said, holding the photo up. "This is a fake. Mr. Stone does not deal in fakes. Your father is alive. He is currently selling state secrets to the Russians. Secrets that Mr. Stone owns. If you want to know why your father faked his death and left you with his debts, you will come with me." Sarah looked at the check. It was enough to pay her rent for 2 years. It was enough to run. But the photo, If her father was alive, everything she knew was a lie. "I need 5 minutes to change," she said. "You have 2. 20 minutes later, she was in the back of a Maybach, with tinted windows, gliding toward the Upper East Side. The rain lashed against the glass, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon blood. The car didn't stop at a restaurant. It stopped at a private airfield in Teterboro, New Jersey. "Where are we going?" Sarah demanded, gripping the door handle. The partition slid down. Kenji was in the front passenger seat, looking at a tablet. He didn't turn around. "London," he said. "We have a meeting with the Bratva, and since my last interpreter had an unfortunate accident in the kitchen of the Obsidian, there is a job opening." "I didn't agree to this," Sarah snapped. "You can't just kidnap me." Kenji turned then. The interior light caught the sharp angle of his jaw. "Kidnap you accepted the money. You got in the car, and you want to find your father. That makes you an employee. I'm a waitress. You are a liar, Serafina. I looked into your file. You aren't just a waitress. You were a linguistics prodigy at Columbia before you dropped out. You speak 4 languages. You have an eidetic memory. You are exactly what I need." "And what happens if I refuse?" Kenji smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then I drop you off at the gate. You keep the money. But I burn the file on your father, and you never find him. The choice is yours." Sarah looked out the window at the sleek Gulfstream jet waiting on the tarmac. Her father had left her with nothing but debt and questions. This dangerous, beautiful man was offering answers. "I have conditions," she said. "I'm listening." "I don't carry a gun, I don't kill anyone, and I get to ask my father one question before you do whatever you're going to do to him." Kenji turned back to the front. "Agreed. Wheels up in 10 minutes." Sarah realized then that she hadn't just accepted a job. She had just stepped onto the game board, and she had no idea she was the pawn. The flight to London was a blur of luxury and tension. Sarah didn't sleep. She spent the 7 hours studying the dossier Kenji had thrown onto her lap. The target was Viktor Volkov, a Russian arms dealer operating out of a penthouse in Knightsbridge. The meeting was supposed to be a peace treaty. The Satogumi wanted access to Volkov's shipping lanes in the North Sea. Volkov wanted Kenji's political connections in Tokyo. "Volkov speaks English," Sarah said, closing the file as the plane began its descent over the grey sprawl of London. "Why do you need me?" Kenji was sipping espresso, looking immaculate despite the long flight. "Volkov speaks English when he wants to be understood. He speaks Russian to his lieutenants when he is planning to kill you. I need to know what he is saying to the men standing behind me. So I'm a spy. You are an insurance policy." They landed and were whisked to the Dorchester. Sarah was given a suite that cost more per night than she made in a year. On the bed was a dress, a deep emerald silk gown, backless, sophisticated, and severely restricted. Beside it lay a pair of heels and a small earpiece. "Put the earpiece in," Silas told her at the door. "It connects directly to Kenji. If you hear the code word midnight, you drop to the floor. Do not ask why. Just drop." Sarah's hands shook as she zipped the dress. She looked in the mirror. The waitress from Queens was gone. In her place was a woman who looked like she belonged in this world of sharks. The meeting took place in Volkov's private dining room. The walls were lined with original Francis Bacon paintings, grotesque screaming faces that matched the knot in Sarah's stomach. Volkov was a bear of a man with gold teeth and a laugh that sounded like a rock crusher. He hugged Kenji like an old friend. "Kieran, my friend from the East." Volkov boomed in heavily accented English. "Victor," Kenji nodded. "This is my associate, Miss Sterling." Volkov's eyes raked over Sarah. "Pretty. Does she speak?" "Only when necessary," Kenji said. They sat. The table was laden with caviar and vodka. As the negotiations began, Sarah sat silently, eating nothing. She tuned her ears to the background noise. Volkov's men were standing by the perimeter. 2 of them were whispering near the service entrance. Sarah concentrated, filtering out the clatter of silverware. "The soup," one Russian whispered. "Wait for the soup." "Is the antidote ready for the boss?" the other asked. Sarah's blood ran cold. It wasn't a shooting. It was poison. Volkov was currently toasting Kenji, raising a glass of vodka. To partnership and to the soup, the chef's specialty. The waiters were bringing in bowls of borscht. The steam rose, smelling of beets and dill. And death. Sarah looked at Kenji. He was reaching for his spoon. She couldn't shout. If she shouted, they would just shoot them. She had to be smarter. She tapped her water glass with her fingernail, a sharp, rhythmic ting-ting-ting. It was Morse code. SOS. Kenji paused. He looked at her. He knew the code. Sarah locked eyes with him and glanced at the soup, then at Volkov's untouched bowl. Kenji smiled at Volkov. "Victor, in my culture, it is customary for the host to take the first sip of the soup to honor the guest." Volkov's smile froze. "Is that so? Here we eat together." "I insist," Kenji said softly, "unless there is a reason you do not wish to eat it." The tension in the room snapped tight. The guards by the door reached into their jackets. Volkov stared at the soup. He knew he was caught. He laughed, a low, dark sound. "You are sharper than you look, Stone." Volkov flipped the bowl. The red soup splattered across the white table like a crime scene. "Kill them," Volkov said in Russian. "Midnight," Kenji whispered. Sarah dropped. The room exploded. Kenji flipped the heavy oak table onto its side, creating a barricade, just as the machine gun fire tore through the air. He grabbed Sarah by the arm and hauled her behind the cover of the wood. Splinters rained down on them. "You knew!" Sarah screamed over the gunfire. "You knew they were going to try it." Kenji pulled a handgun from a holster at the small of his back. "I suspected. You confirmed it. Good work, Sterling. We're going to die here. Not today." Kenji looked at the ventilation grate near the floor. He shot the hinges off. "Go. Crawl. I am wearing a $3,000 dress. Crawl or bleed, Serafina." She crawled. She squeezed into the dusty, narrow metal duct, the silk of her dress tearing on the screws. Kenji followed, firing 2 shots behind him to suppress the Russians. They scrambled through the dark tunnels of the hotel's infrastructure. It was hot, claustrophobic, and smelled of grease. When they finally kicked out a grate into the laundry room in the basement, they tumbled onto a pile of hotel towels, gasping for air. Sarah was covered in dust, her hair a mess, her dress ruined. She looked at Kenji. He had a smudge of dirt on his cheek, the only imperfection on him. Adrenaline was pumping through her veins like fire. She should be crying. She should be hysterical. Instead, she started laughing. It was a manic, terrified laugh. "The soup!" she wheezed. "It was the damn soup!" Kenji looked at her, and for the first time the mask slipped. A genuine amusement softened his eyes. He reached out and wiped a smudge of soot from her forehead. His thumb lingered on her skin for a fraction of a second too long. "You have good ears, Serafina," he said softly. "But now we have a problem." "What problem?" "Volkov wasn't acting alone. He took a call right before we entered. I read his lips." Sarah froze. Who was he talking to? He was talking to someone in New York. Someone who knew we were coming. Someone who gave him the order to kill us both. Kenji stood up and offered her a hand. "There is a traitor in my organization, Serafina, and until I find him, we are both ghosts. We can't go back to the hotel. We can't go to the airport. So where do we go?" Kenji checked the magazine of his gun. "We go to the one place nobody will look for a Japanese mob boss and his interpreter." "Which is?" "The underground," Kenji said. "Welcome to the real London, Miss Sterling." The laundry room of the Dorchester was a humid trap, but the streets of London were a cold labyrinth. Kenji and Sarah emerged from the service exit into a back alley that smelled of wet brick and refuse. The rain had turned into a deluge, washing away the dust of the ventilation shaft, but soaking them to the bone. "We need a car," Kenji said, his voice tight. He was favoring his left side. Sarah looked at him, squinting through the rain. "You're hurt." "A graze, from the wood splinters. It's fine." It wasn't fine. A dark stain was blossoming on the side of his white dress shirt, just above the hip. But Kenji Sato moved with a frightening determination. He didn't hotwire a car, that was for movies. Instead, he walked up to a black cab idling, while the driver took a smoke break, flashed a roll of cash, thick enough to choke a horse, and bought the vehicle on the spot. The driver, a bewildered man named Nigel, was left standing in the rain holding £5,000, while Kenji sped off, shifting gears with his uninjured hand. "You drive like a maniac." Sarah gripped the dashboard as they swerved around a double-decker bus. "I drive with purpose," Kenji corrected. "Check the glove box. There should be a first aid kit, or at least vodka." They drove east, away from the polished facades of Maybach, and into the graffiti-laden grit of Shoreditch. The city changed. The lights became harsher, the shadows deeper. They ditched the cab 3 blocks from their destination and walked the rest of the way. Kenji led her to an unassuming, heavy steel door sandwiched between a curry house and a derelict warehouse. He punched a code into a keypad hidden behind a loose brick. The door hissed open. The safe house was a converted loft. It was stark cold and filled with dust sheets, but it had electricity and running water. "Lock the door," Kenji commanded, as he collapsed onto a leather sofa, his face draining of color. Sarah secured the deadbolts, 3 of them. When she turned back, Kenji had removed his jacket and unbuttoned his shirt. The wound was ugly, a jagged tear where a bullet had grazed his oblique muscle. It wasn't deep enough to kill, but it was bleeding sluggishly. "I need you to stitch it," Kenji said, throwing a small medical kit onto the table. "I can't reach the angle." Sarah froze. "I'm a waitress, Kenji, not a surgeon." "You have steady hands, Serafina. I saw you pour wine during an earthquake of a translation error without spilling a drop. Thread the needle." Sarah washed her hands in the kitchenette sink, her heart hammering against her ribs. She returned to him, kneeling beside the sofa. Up close, without the armor of his suit, Kenji looked human. Dangerous, yes, but mortal. His skin was tattooed, traditional Irizumi ink. A dragon coiled over his shoulder, its claws stopping just inches from the wound. She sterilized the needle with rubbing alcohol. "This is going to hurt." "Do it." She worked in silence. Every time the needle pierced his skin, his muscles bunched rock hard, but he didn't make a sound. He just watched her. His gaze was intense, unblinking, studying her face, as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Why did you lie?" Sarah asked softly, tying off the final stitch. "About what?" "About my father. You said he was selling secrets. But back at the hotel, Volkov implied the traitor was someone close. Someone who knew we were coming." Kenji sat up, wincing slightly. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a dusty bottle on the shelf. "Your father is selling secrets, Serafina. But he isn't the traitor inside my organization. He is the product." Sarah took the glass he offered. The whiskey burned, grounding her. "I don't understand." "The traitor in my ranks. Let's call him the Ghost, for now. He stole a ledger, a digital list of every politician, judge, and police chief on my payroll. It is the key to my empire. The ghost needs a broker to sell that list to the highest bidder. Your father, Richard Sterling, is the broker. Sarah felt sick. So we aren't just looking for the traitor. We're looking for my dad so you can stop the sale. And so I can kill the traitor, Kenji added darkly. Your father is the bait. And what happens to the bait when the shark arrives? Kenji looked at her. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threats. Finally he sighed. If he cooperates, he lives. I give you my word. But we have to find him before Volkov or the Russians do, because they won't be as polite. Suddenly the lights in the loft flickered and died. Sarah gasped. A power outage. No, Kenji whispered, reaching for his gun on the table. They cut the line. He moved with terrifying speed, extinguishing the singular candle they had lit. The loft plunged into pitch blackness. Get to the bathroom, Kenji breathed into her ear. Lock the door and get in the tub. Do not come out until I say your name. Kenji. Go. Sarah scrambled across the floor, her bare feet silent on the concrete. She made it to the bathroom and locked the door, sliding into the porcelain tub. She curled into a ball, covering her ears. Outside, the steel door of the loft blew inward with a deafening crump. Flashbangs. Sarah saw the bright white light sear through the crack under the bathroom door. Then came the gunfire. It wasn't the rhythmic spray of machine guns this time. It was precise, controlled taps. Pop, pop, pop. She heard glass shattering. She heard the grunt of men fighting hand to hand, the sound of furniture being smashed, then silence. Sarah held her breath until her lungs burned. Please be alive. Please be alive. Serafina. His voice was rough, strained. She unlocked the door. The main room was illuminated by the streetlights, filtering through the smoke. 3 men lay on the floor. They were dressed in black tactical gear, wearing no insignias. Professionals. Kenji was standing over one of them, holding a phone he had pulled from the dead man's pocket. He was bleeding from a cut on his cheek, but he was alive. They found us fast, Kenji said, looking at the phone screen. Too fast. How? Sarah stepped over a shattered lamp, trembling. Tracker, Kenji said. He looked at her. Not on me. I swept myself. He walked toward her. For a second, she thought he was accusing her. But he reached out and gently took her wrist. He lifted her left arm and inspected the seam of her emerald dress. There, he said. Buried in the thick hem of the cuff was a tiny flat disc, smaller than a dime. Volkov's men didn't plant this, Kenji said, crushing the device between his fingers. Volkov wanted us dead at the dinner. He wouldn't need to track us if we were dead. Then who? The person who gave you the dress, Kenji said. My head of security. Silas. The realization hung in the air like toxic smoke. Silas. The mountain of a man who had dragged the interpreter away. The man who had handed Sarah the envelope. The man who had been at Kenji's right hand for 10 years. He checked the perimeter. Kenji said, his voice dangerously calm. He arranged the flight. He gave you the dress. Why didn't he just kill you in New York? Sarah asked. Because in New York, I am surrounded by loyalists. If I die there, a war starts that Silas cannot control. But if I die in London, killed by Russian rivals during a peace summit, Silas returns home as the grieving avenger. He takes the throne, blames Volkov, and no one questions him. Kenji walked to the window, looking out at the rain-slicked streets. He thinks I'm dead. The hit squad hasn't reported back yet. We have a window of time. To run. To attack. Kenji turned to her. The phone I took from the assassin. It has one outgoing message sent 10 minutes ago. Target acquired. Asset is with him. I'm the asset, Sarah realized. Yes. Which means Silas needs you alive. Probably to unlock something of your father's. Richard Sterling likely encrypted the stolen list with a key only his daughter would know. A date, a name, a phrase. My father loves puzzles, Sarah whispered. He used to send me letters in cipher when I was in boarding school. Kenji handed her the assassin's phone. We are going to call Silas, and we are going to tell him he missed. That sounds suicidal. It's psychological warfare. If he knows I'm coming, he will panic. He will try to liquidate the merchandise immediately. He will call your father. And we trace the call, Sarah finished. They left the loft, stepping over the bodies of the hit squad. Kenji took a tablet from one of the dead men's packs. They found an all-night internet cafe in a basement in Hackney. It was filled with gamers and insomniacs who didn't look up as a battered man in a torn suit and a woman in a ruined evening gown walked in. Kenji connected the tablet to the assassin's phone. Ready? Sarah nodded. She felt a strange calm. The fear had burned away, leaving only a cold anger. They had used her. They had manipulated her father. Kenji dialed Silas. He put it on speaker. The phone rang twice. Report, Silas's voice answered. Gruff, expectant. Kenji didn't speak. He just let the silence stretch. Report, Silas barked. Is it done? Kenji leaned into the microphone. The aim was poor, Silas. You should have hired better help. A long pause, then a low chuckle. You always were hard to kill, boss. I suppose this means I'm fired. It means you are a dead man walking. Kenji said, I'm coming for you. Come then. But you better hurry. The auction is moving up, and your girlfriend's father is getting impatient. He wants his money so he can disappear again. The line went dead. Kenji immediately began typing on the tablet. Code cascaded down the screen. Tracing the endpoint. Come on. Did you get it? He used a scrambler, but he stayed on the line too long to gloat. Got him. Kenji pointed to a map coordinate blinking on the screen. He's not in London. He's at a country estate in Surrey. Blackwood Manor. Sarah looked at the screen. That's not just a manor. That's the residence of Lord Sterling. Kenji looked at her. Relation. My uncle, Sarah, said, her eyes widening. My father's brother. He's a lord. I thought he was a banker. He is a banker who launders money for the cartels. It seems this is a family reunion. Kenji stood up. We need weapons, and we need a way into a fortress guarded by private military contractors. I know how to get in, Sarah said. I spent my summers there as a child. There's a servant's entrance that leads through the old wine cellar. It bypasses the main gate security. Kenji looked at her with a newfound respect. Lead the way, Serafina. They stole a car this time, a nondescript sedan. As they drove south out of London, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a dull ache. Kenji, Sarah asked, staring out at the dark highway. If we survive this, what happens to me? Kenji didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the road. You are free. I pay you the rest of the money. You go back to New York, or Paris, wherever you want. And you? I go back to the shadows. It is where I belong. Sarah looked at his profile, the sharp jaw, the tired eyes. She reached out and placed her hand over his on the gear stick. He didn't pull away. I don't think I can go back to waiting tables, she said. No, Kenji murmured, lacing his fingers through hers. You were never meant to wait tables. For a moment, in the quiet of the speeding car, they weren't a mob boss and a waitress. They were just two people running toward the fire, holding on to the only thing that felt real. Blackwood Manor rose from the mist like a Gothic nightmare. It was a sprawling estate of stone and ivy surrounded by a 12-foot iron fence, topped with razor wire. The driveway was lined with luxury cars, Bentleys, Rolls, Royces, Ferraris. "It's a party," Kenji observed, watching from the tree line where they had ditched the car. "A masquerade." "My uncle loves theatrics," Sarah whispered. "He holds a midsummer ball every year. Everyone wears masks. It's the perfect cover for an illicit auction." "Masks," Kenji mused. "That works in our favor." They didn't have masks, but they had the element of surprise. They circled the perimeter to the north side of the estate, where the ground sloped down toward a creek. Sarah found the old wooden hatch hidden beneath a pile of overgrown rhododendrons. "I haven't been down here since I was 10, she said, prying the rotten wood open. "It smells like mold." "Better than gunpowder," Kenji said. He dropped down, first gun drawn. "Clear." They navigated the damp, cobweb-filled tunnel. It led them into the sub-basement, specifically the wine cellar. Rows of dusty vintage bottles lined the walls. Above them, the muffled thumping of bass from the party vibrated through the floorboards. They moved up the service stairs. They needed disguises. They found them in the cloakroom. A drunk couple had stumbled in for a tryst and left their masks and cloaks on a chair while they were occupied in a side room. Kenji moved silently, swiping a black Venetian mask and a velvet cape. He handed a silver filigree mask to Sarah. "Put it on," he whispered. "We blend in. Find Silas. Find your father." They entered the ballroom. It was a kaleidoscope of excess. Chandeliers the size of small cars glittered overhead. Hundreds of people in elaborate costumes danced, drank, and laughed. The air smelled of expensive perfume and decadence. Sarah felt a hand on the small of her back. Kenji pulled her close, guiding her onto the dance floor. "Keep moving," he murmured against her hair. "We are less visible in the motion." They waltzed. It was surreal. Sarah was dancing with a Japanese mafia boss in her uncle's mansion, surrounded by the criminal elite of Europe. Kenji moved with a surprising grace, leading her effortlessly. "Do you see him?" Sarah asked, scanning the crowd. "Silas is on the balcony," Kenji said, his voice tightening. "He's talking to the security detail. He looks nervous. And my father, I don't see him, but the auction wouldn't happen out here. It would be in the library. Soundproof. Private." "My uncle's study," Sarah nodded. "Second floor, east wing." "We move on the turn." They spun toward the edge of the dance floor. As the song ended, they slipped into the hallway. The east wing was guarded. Two men in suits stood by the double mahogany doors. "I can take them," Kenji said, reaching for his weapon. "No," Sarah said. "Too loud. Let me." She took a deep breath, adjusted her mask, and walked straight toward the guards. She adopted the haughty, slightly slurred speech of a drunk debutante. "Excuse me," she announced loudly, stumbling slightly. "My uncle, Lord Sterling. He promised me the key to the wine cooler. This party is dry as a bone." The guards looked at each other. "Miss, this area is restricted." "Restricted?" Sarah scoffed, switching to French, then Italian, confusing them. "Do you know who I am? I am the guest of honor." She lunged forward as if to hug the guard. As he moved to catch her, she jammed the heel of her stiletto down onto his instep with all her weight. He yelped, bending over. In that split second, Kenji emerged from the shadows. Two swift strikes, chops to the carotid arteries, and both guards crumpled silently to the floor. "Remind me never to make you angry," Kenji whispered, dragging the bodies into a nearby closet. They opened the library doors. The room was dimly lit. A fire crackled in the hearth. Seated in a high-backed leather chair was a man holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. Standing behind him was Silas, his gun drawn and pointed at the door. "You're late," the man in the chair said. He turned around. Sarah stopped breathing. It was him. Older, grayer, his face lined with guilt and greed, But it was Richard Sterling, her father. "Hello, Serafina," Richard said. He didn't look happy to see her. He looked resigned. "Dad," Sarah's voice broke. You did this. All of this." "I had no choice, sweetheart," Richard said, standing up. He looked small next to Silas. "The debts. They were going to kill me. Silas offered me a way out. One job. Decrypt the Sato list, sell it to the Russians, and we both walk away with $10 million. Enough for you and me to disappear to an island. You sold me out," Kenji said, stepping forward, his mask off. His eyes were cold fire. "You sold my family out. Your family are murderers." "Stone." Richard snapped a flash of his old arrogance returning. "Don't preach honor to me. You're a thug in a suit." "And you are a traitor," Kenji said. "Silas, you betray your oath for this man." Silas smirked. "I didn't do it for him, boss. I did it for the money. The Yakuza life. Honor fingers loyalty. It's outdated. Cash is king." Silas cocked the hammer of his gun. "Drop the weapon, Kenji, or the girl dies first." Kenji hesitated. He looked at Sarah. "Don't do it," Sarah cried. Kenji slowly placed his gun on the floor and kicked it away. "Good," Silas said. "Now, Richard, finish the transfer. The buyer is waiting for the confirmation." Richard turned back to the laptop on the desk. "It's almost done. 99%. Sarah looked at her father. "Dad, please. If you do this, Kenji dies. I die. You know Silas won't leave witnesses." Richard's hands hovered over the keyboard. He looked at Silas, then at his daughter. "He promised you'd be safe, Sarah," Richard said weakly. "He lied." Sarah screamed. "Look at him, he's going to kill us all." Silas laughed. "Smart girl. Too smart." He shifted his aim from Kenji to Sarah. "Hurry up, old man, or I shoot her in the leg." Kenji's eyes flicked to Sarah. He gave a microscopic nod. "Get down." "Dad!" Sarah yelled. Richard Sterling made a choice. He didn't hit enter. He grabbed the heavy crystal decanter from the desk and smashed it into the side of Silas's head. Silas roared, staggering back, the gun going off wild. The bullet shattered a bust of Julius Caesar. "Kenji!" Sarah screamed, dropping to the floor. Kenji was already moving. He didn't dive for his gun. He dove for Silas. He tackled the massive bodyguard, crashing him through the French doors and out onto the stone balcony. They wrestled in the rain glass, crunching beneath them. Silas was stronger, heavier. He punched Kenji in the wounded side, making him gasp in pain. Silas wrapped his hands around Kenji's throat, squeezing. "Die, you stubborn son of a bitch," Silas grunted. Sarah scrambled for Kenji's dropped gun. She picked it up. It was heavy. Her hands shook. She ran to the broken doors. Silas was choking the life out of Kenji. Kenji's face was turning purple. "Let him go," Sarah screamed. Silas didn't stop. He didn't even look at her. "You won't shoot, girl. You don't have the guts." Sarah thought about the restaurant. She thought about the soup. She thought about the way Kenji had held her hand in the car. She didn't aim for the head. She aimed for the shoulder. Bang! The recoil nearly dislocated her wrist. The bullet missed the shoulder. It hit Silas in the neck. Silas froze. His grip on Kenji loosened. He reached up, touching the wound, looking at the blood on his fingers in disbelief. He tried to speak, but only a gurgle came out. He slumped sideways, toppling over the balcony railing, falling into the dark hedges below. Silence returned to the room, broken only by the wind and the distant music of the party. Kenji coughed, gasping for air, clutching his throat. He looked up at Sarah. She was standing there, the smoking gun hanging from her hand, tears streaming down her face. Richard Sterling stood by the desk, pale as a ghost. "Sarah!" Richard started. "Don't," Sarah whispered. She turned the gun toward her father. "Sarah, I saved you," Richard pleaded. "I hit him." "You sold us," she said. "You sold me." Kenji stood up, using the doorframe for support. He walked over to Sarah and gently took the gun from her hand. "It's over," Kenji said softly. "The police are coming," Richard said, looking out the window. "Someone heard the shot. We have to go." "We?" Kenji asked. He looked at Richard. "There is no we, Richard. You are going to stay here and explain to the police why there is a dead mercenary in your garden. They'll arrest me." "Better prison than what I would do to you," Kenji said coldly. He grabbed the laptop from the desk. "I'm taking this." He took Sarah's arm. "Come. We have to leave before the lockdown." Sarah looked at her father one last time. He looked pathetic, small and selfish. "Goodbye, Dad," she said. They ran. They fled through the servants' entrance, back through the wine cellar, back into the night. They reached the car just as the sirens began to wail in the distance. As they sped away, Kenji looked at Sarah. She was staring at her hands. "You saved my life," he said. "I killed him," she whispered. "You did what was necessary." Kenji pulled the car to the side of the road, miles away from the estate. He turned off the engine. "Listen to me," he said, forcing her to look at him. "You are not a killer. You are a survivor. There is a difference." He leaned in. The air between them was electric, charged with the violence and the relief of survival. "I cannot keep you in this life, Serafina," he whispered, his face inches from hers. "It will destroy you." "I think," Sarah said, her voice trembling, "that I am already destroyed." "Then let me build you back up." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, tasting of rain and blood and adrenaline. It was a promise and an apology all at once. But as they pulled apart, Kenji's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His expression hardened. The softness vanished. The mask was back. "What is it?" Sarah asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "The laptop," Kenji said. "I just got a notification. The file transfer. Your father didn't stop it. It completed 5 seconds before he hit Silas." Sarah went cold. "So the Russians have the list?" "No," Kenji said, looking at her with a terrified realization. "The destination wasn't the Russians. The IP address. It traces back to Tokyo." "Or to who?" "To the High Council of the Yakuza," Kenji said. "My superiors. The men who exiled me." "Why would your father send it to them?" "He didn't," Kenji said. "Silas didn't set up the transfer to sell the list. He sent it to frame me. He sent the list to the High Council to prove that I was weak, that I had lost control of my secrets." Kenji started the car, the tires screeching on the asphalt. "The High Council does not tolerate weakness," Kenji said grimly. "They have already dispatched the cleaners. We aren't safe in London. We aren't safe anywhere." "So what do we do?" Kenji looked at the road ahead, his eyes narrowing. "We go to the source," he said. "We go to Tokyo, and we burn the High Council to the ground." Tokyo was a city of ghosts, and neon, a blinding contrast to the grey damp of London. Kenji and Sarah didn't arrive as conquerors. They arrived as fugitives. They moved through the back alleys of Shinjuku, the rain masking their faces, the noise of the pachinko parlors drowning out their footsteps. The High Council of the Satogumi met in a place that didn't officially exist. The penthouse of the Azure Tower, a black obelisk overlooking the district. "They will kill us the moment the elevator doors open," Sarah said. She was wearing a trench coat over a fresh suit Kenji had procured. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. "They will try," Kenji corrected. "But they are curious. They want to know why the exile returned to the scene of his crime, and they want the password." "The password to the file Silas sent." "Exactly. Silas sent the data, but my system automatically encrypted it upon transfer. The council has the file, but they can't open it. They are staring at a locked box. And I'm the key, Sarah realized. You are the voice, Kenji said. Tonight you do not just translate language, you translate power. They entered the lobby. Security guards moved to intercept them, but Kenji held up a single hand. He spoke a phrase in low, guttural Japanese, an old code of parley. The guards hesitated, then stepped aside, bowing low. They recognized the aura of an oyabun, even one marked for death. The elevator ride was silent. When the door slid open on the 50th floor, the air smelled of incense and steel. The council chamber was a vast room with tatami mats and a panoramic view of the skyline. 5 elderly men sat in a semicircle. Behind them stood a dozen swordsman traditionalists who preferred carbon steel to bullets. In the center sat the chairman, Elder Tanaka. He looked like a dried leaf, brittle but poisonous. Kenji walked to the center of the room and sat on his knees. Sarah knelt beside him, her head bowed, playing the role of the submissive servant. "You have some nerve, Sato," Tanaka rasped in Japanese. "You lose control of your territory. You let a foreign dog like Silas steal your secrets, and now you come here to beg." Tanaka looked at Sarah. "And you brought a pet. How quaint." The room fell silent. They waited for the interpreter to speak. Sarah raised her head. She didn't look at Kenji. She looked directly at Tanaka. "The oyabun does not beg," Sarah said, her Japanese perfect, her tone dripping with the icy formality of an executioner. "And he didn't lose the secrets. He delivered them to you." Tanaka frowned. "What is she saying?" Kenji remained silent, his face a mask. He was letting her lead. "The file you received." Sarah continued, rising to her feet, a breach of protocol that made the swordsman tense. "It is not a list of Kenji Sato's weaknesses. It is a list of yours." The council members shifted uneasily. Inside that encrypted file, Sarah said, her voice projecting through the vast hall, are the records of Elder Tanaka's embezzlement from the pension fund, Elder Ito's secret dealings with the CIA, and the coordinates of the unauthorized shipments of gold you have all been skimming. Tanaka stood up, his face purple. "Lies kill them." The swordsmen drew their blades. The sound was a collective shing that rang through the room. "If we die," Sarah said calmly, switching to English to emphasize the threat, "the encryption key dies with us. And if the key is not entered in," she checked her watch. 3 minutes the file automatically forwards to the Tokyo Metropolitan Police, the FBI, and the press. The swordsmen froze. They looked to Tanaka for orders. Tanaka stared at Kenji. "You are bluffing," Kenji finally spoke. He didn't shout. He whispered, "Test me." The silence stretched, agonizing and thin. The heavy rain lashed against the glass walls. Tanaka looked at the clock on the wall. 2 minutes. He looked at the other elders. They were terrified. Their greed had been exposed, and the exile they had underestimated held the trigger. "What do you want?" Tanaka hissed. Kenji stood up. He smoothed his suit. "Retirement," Kenji said. "All of you. Tonight." "You cannot demand 1 minute," Sarah announced. Tanaka trembled. He looked at the swordsman, then back at the man who had outplayed him. The era of the old guard was over. It had ended not with a war, but with a data packet and a translator. "Done," Tanaka whispered, sinking back onto his cushion. "Call it off." Kenji pulled a phone from his pocket. He typed in a code. "The data is secured," Kenji said. "But it remains on a timer. Every 24 hours I must reset it, which means as long as I am the oyabun, you are safe. If I die, you all rot in prison." He turned his back on them, the ultimate sign of disrespect and dominance. Let's go, Serafina. They walked out of the azure tower untouched. The guards bowed deeper this time. They weren't bowing to a fugitive. They were bowing to the new king. Outside, the rain had stopped. The neon lights of Tokyo reflected in the puddles on the street. Kenji took a deep breath of the city air. He looked at Sarah. "You speak the language of kings very well," he said. "I had a good teacher," Sarah replied. She leaned against the railing, looking out at the city. "So this is it. You're the boss of bosses now." "It seems so." "Does the position come with an interpreter?" Kenji stepped closer. He reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. His touch was no longer tentative. It was possessive, warm, and real. "No," Kenji said softly. "I don't need an interpreter anymore. I need a partner, a queen." Sarah smiled. It wasn't the polite smile of a waitress hoping for a tip. It was the smile of a woman who had walked through fire and come out holding the flame. "I'm expensive," she warned. "I own Tokyo," Kenji replied, leaning in to kiss her. "Put it on my tab." In a world defined by silence and secrets, Serafina Sterling learned that the most dangerous weapon wasn't a gun or a sword. It was a voice that refused to tremble. She started as a waitress, invisible to the powerful men around her, but she ended as the only one who truly understood the game. Kenji Sato didn't just find a translator that night at the Obsidian. He found his equal. Together they proved that while words can start wars, the right words spoken at the right time can conquer empires. And that is the story of how a spilled glass of wine and a mistranslation changed the underworld forever. It's a reminder that sometimes the person you ignore is the only one who can save your life or end it. If you enjoyed this twisty mafia thriller, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with a friend who loves a good romance with high stakes. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. What would you have done if you were Sarah? Would you have spoken up at the table or stayed silent? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.